Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for watching and thank you for being here. Today we're going to be continuing my 2020 catch-up with the movies and TV shows that I've seen so far this year. If in the last video I talked about late releases that we got in the Philippines, in this video we're going to be talking about new movies that came out in cinemas in the first 2.5 months of the year. However, as always, before I continue, I have left some links down below that I really hope you guys can check out. The first is for helpfromhome.ph, which is a resource where you can find different vulnerable sectors during this time of the COVID pandemic, whom you can help out through donations and other means. Please do donate as regularly as you want if you can. And the other thing I want to link down below is a card with a double R to a bunch of different things that are going on in the Philippines, a bunch of different things that I think we all need to stay atop of and stay vigilant about. And that card also links to other cards about Black Lives Matter, the Yemen crisis, the Hong Kong situation, all that kind of stuff. Please do stay updated, keep updated with the news, and of course stay safe and stay healthy. Now let's get on with the movies. This will hopefully be a little shorter than the last video because I have less to say about these ones. So the first new movie that I actually got to see in cinemas this year was unfortunately the 2020 remake of The Grudge. I feel like we get these horror remakes every few years and they're always bad for some reason. Betty Gilpin has a very small part in this movie and she's very good in it. John Cho is also in this movie and he's trying very hard. But despite their best efforts, this is your run-of-the-mill, typically ugly, jump scare heavy horror remake, which is also weirdly cruel at times as well. I feel like most horror movies, when they kill off certain characters in like really creative ways, there's always at least a little bit of like a moralistic reason as to why that character has to die. But in this movie, for some reason, I felt like a lot of the characters were just being killed off for no reason, and the deaths aren't really that creative either. So it just felt kind of weird and nasty watching them die. The movie does try to be a little ambitious with its structure. It's sort of like an anthology movie, but the timeline is all mixed up. But the different stories don't really connect to each other that clearly, and I don't know what sort of major theme they're all trying to address. If the idea behind this movie is that violence persists throughout history or whatever, we don't really need a new horror movie to let us know that, so yeah. Next up we have Bad Boys for Life, which is just the epitome of the glorified cop narrative. They're not even trying to hide it in this movie. Mike and Marcus are horrible human beings who operate outside of the law more often than they do within it. It's kind of a weird movie to talk about now, especially with all the stuff happening around the world with regards to law enforcement, and I feel like revisiting this movie, it's just going to age it so poorly already. But what I will say about Bad Boys, as like horribly tone deaf as the entire thing is, I mean, like the villains are like just cartoon Mexican characters. As much as the movie is like that, I feel like compared to a lot of throwback 90s action things, this one is really self-aware. Like, it knows exactly what it is and it doesn't care that it's so tone deaf. So it embraces those things and it ends up being a little more fun. Of course, if you can divorce yourself from the depiction of cops in this movie. But the action is well choreographed and the movie really benefits from the chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. For the most part, like, this movie is at its best when it's just these two characters talking to each other, bantering and stuff like that. That stuff is often more entertaining than the action scenes. But yeah, like, it's a weird movie to talk about right now. It is fun if you can just watch it in a vacuum. Next up, we have a movie that is very dear to my heart for certain reasons, and that is Dolittle. Now, the reason why, like, when I think about this movie, I just, like, smile to myself is that it's really bad, number one, but number two, it's sort of the reason why I defend cats so much. Like, whenever anybody makes fun of cats and makes it like the butt of everyone's jokes, to me, like, all the hate that cats gets, I feel like it should go to Dolittle because it is exponentially worse of a movie. It's truly one of the sloppiest movies I've ever seen, just in terms of its technical aspects as well. The CGI for the animals does look kind of good close up, but for the most part, this whole movie is just this noisy, like, assault on the senses with really bad, like, large-scale CGI. And the editing is absolutely atrocious. And as you watch this movie, if you ever watch this movie, for me it becomes clear that what they did is that they took every single like throwaway line from the voice recording sessions for the actors, and they tried to stuff in every single line into every single set piece. Because as you watch these set pieces, you'll notice that the camera keeps cutting to different animals just so they can say like a random stupid thing or like a really corny joke, and none of it works, and it becomes just impossible to watch the movie because it keeps cutting away to these fake animals saying really stupid things. It also has like no story and no message whatsoever. And I know some people will argue that, it's just like a kid's movie or a family film, so it doesn't necessarily need a message, but come on, man, we live in a world where like Paddington 2 exists, where Toy Story exists, and kids aren't as dumb as a lot of movie producers might think they are. They will be able to tell when there's a message or not. And with Dolittle, especially like with the way it ends, like there's no character growth anywhere, and the ending is completely unearned, so I don't know what they were going for here. The cast is also so miscast. Like every single celebrity who's voicing an animal, it doesn't feel like their voice fits that animal. And Robert Downey Jr. turns in one of the worst performances I've ever seen, and I paid to watch this movie, okay? I just don't know why, after all his success, he decided to produce and star in this movie where he takes on like the weirdest accent I've ever heard. Like the accent changes like nationality every sentence. Like there's so many parts of this movie where he sounds Jamaican for some reason. It seems like he was trying to do like a Daniel Craig in Knives Out, but that character worked because that character was actually a character who you cared for, and the crazy accent sort of complemented his weird unorthodox detective style. But here I don't know why Robert Downey Jr. sounds like a Jamaican, okay? It's just ridiculous. It's gonna shock me if this isn't the worst movie of the year by the end of the year, so we'll see. Next up is only one of a couple of new Filipino movies I was able to see in cinemas this year, and that is Block C, directed by Mikael Red. I will start this off by saying that I'm not a huge fan of Mikael Red's last few movies, Neo Manila, Eerie, and Dead Kids. And my issues with those movies extend to my issues with Block C as well. I feel like Mikael Red is the kind of genre filmmaker who clearly loves like different genres, but when he tries to make them on his own, he just sort of ends up replicating certain genre tropes and whatnot, but he doesn't really do anything with those tropes. For me, like these movies, like their point seems to be the genre itself. And in Block C, like the point seems to be to just make a zombie movie and possibly franchise it, but not say anything through the genre. It's a movie that seems to be very convinced of its own novelty in the Philippine film industry. It does a lot of things that we see in every single zombie movie, but it like forces the spotlight on these things so much, as if to impress us with the fact that, hey, remember that really common zombie trope? Now we have it in our own language. But that's not really impressive. However, as generic as Block C is, I still had a lot of fun. I would be a liar if I said that I didn't daydream about zombie apocalypses a lot back then. I like the fact that it's sort of scrappy and it's kind of like a small, low-budget zombie movie. And it is fun. The sequences of peril and light horror are well done. So, as like a genre exercise, I think it is successful, but again, I wish we would get more genre stories that actually told stories. I wouldn't have minded if Block C really didn't have like a message, but when you start the movie with like news footage and like very blunt political messaging that just sort of hangs over the rest of the film, you should follow through on that, but this movie doesn't, so yeah. Next up, we have maybe the only mainstream superhero movie we're going to get in cinemas in 2020, and that is Birds of Prey. Okay, I'm gonna say some good things and some bad things, but first I want to preface all of that by saying that the more I think about Birds of Prey, the better it gets in my mind. And I think that if you haven't seen it and you want to support it, please do find a way to watch it because it is so much fun. I'm gonna start with the negative here. The main reason why I don't love Birds of Prey as much as I'd like to is the fact that I'm not super satisfied with the story. I feel like overall the plot kind of just feels like a prologue. It feels like an introduction for all of these characters before they're integrated into future DC movies, maybe. I don't really think anybody has a proper arc, and not just the other Birds of Prey members, but even Harley Quinn herself, I feel, doesn't really have a satisfactory arc. And I realized that my criticism of the movie in that regard is very much informed by Harley Quinn's storyline in the Harley Quinn animated series, which I love. The first season of that show tells a breakup story between her and the Joker, just like in this movie, but it does it with so much nuance and so much access into Harley Quinn's sort of inner character. And I just didn't get that from this movie, and I wish there was a little more of that. However, while I feel that the story was generally lacking, this is, don't get me wrong, like technically speaking, the most accomplished movie in the DCEU, and I don't think it's even close. It looks beautiful, the cinematography is incredible, the production design is great, the costumes I think really work, like they have this sort of grungy DIY quality to them that completely fits the tone and the characters. Also, the stunt work is the best in that this franchise has ever seen, like easily, hands down. Like there is no action scene in any other DC movie, in my opinion, that's better choreographed and better looking than the scene in the police station with Harley Quinn. Also, the performances are great. Ewan McGregor is such a shockingly funny Black Mask. Like, he was just a riot every time he was on screen. And Margot Robbie has pretty much perfected her performance of Harley Quinn in this movie. She is the definitive Harley Quinn. As much as I love Kaylee Cuoco in the animated series, like Harley Quinn is really what comes to mind now when I think of the character. Because what Margot Robbie does is that she just makes Harley Quinn this person who feels everything very, very strongly, but she doesn't make her like a shallow character. She's very sincere with everything. So yeah, like if you ever get the chance to see Birds of Prey, if you haven't seen it yet, please do. It's really, really fun. Next up, we have James and Pat and Dave, which is the other new Filipino movie I got to see in cinemas. This is the sequel to Vincent, Kath, and James, and I had no idea it was a sequel until like the day I watched it. There's really not a whole lot to say about this movie. It's very, you know, your standard rom-com, love theme kind of thing. What I will say though as a big positive is that this movie actually does some really interesting stuff character-wise with the female protagonist. It raises this idea that the woman in a love triangle will always stand to lose the most. You know, she's the one who experiences shame for being in this position, and that's something that not a lot of love triangle movies at all touch on. And I would have loved if they pursued this angle, but they really just don't. For the most part, this movie is just young people doing increasingly dumb things for a romance that shouldn't even exist. It's not convincing in the slightest. And, you know, as much as they have good intentions, these kids just keep messing things up. And I feel like the movie is not self-aware about that at all. Like, it still treats the romance as sincere, even if it's really not. The other thing I will say, though, as like a kind of half-jokingly good thing about this movie, is that it has like the best evil Athenian stereotype I've ever seen in a movie. The character of Dave is just a complete sociopathic fuckboy who, you know, he likes playing guitar, he likes basketball, he has political connections, he flaunts his money and uses it to bargain with people, he talks about social justice but there's no follow-through. He's the perfect evil Athenian. It's amazing. Next up we have Downhill, which is the American remake of Force Majeure, if I'm saying that correctly, which I haven't seen, but you know, when you hear that a movie is an American remake of an acclaimed foreign language movie, you already kind of know what to expect. So this movie is very half-hearted with both its comedy and its drama, and from what I know about the original movie, this one kind of tries to switch things up, but it just kind of makes the story worse. However, as a comedy, it is uncommonly good looking. The cinematography is really beautiful, and the DP really gets a lot out of the Alps as a setting. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who is the lead in this movie, continues to prove that she deserves to have the longest career ever because she is just excellent at everything she does. You know, she can be nasty and hilarious at the same time in the same scene. And if you haven't seen Veep yet, you should watch Veep. Next up, we have maybe the surprise of the year, and that is the new Pixar movie Onward. Now, for about 80 minutes of Onward, it's very average. It's sort of like your standard animated adventure movie. My main issue with Onward is the fact that it really doesn't do anything with its setting. It starts out being sort of like a fantasy versus technology comedy kind of thing, but that whole like visual motif, that this whole setting really has nothing to do with the themes of the movie. And every time this movie tries to do something with that setting, it just sort of reminds you of what they were doing with Shrek like 19 years ago and how Shrek did it so much better. However, it is still fun. The adventure does have a really good sense of scale to it. There are, the stakes do feel urgent. But then after these 80 minutes, you get the last 20 minutes, and suddenly this movie turns into like one of the best Pixar endings like ever, and that's saying a lot, but I really mean it. The ending is just unbelievably emotional, and part of that is because it kind of comes out of left field. You're not expecting this much emotion for this movie, but it still makes sense. Like, it makes emotional sense, and I haven't really seen like a family film do something like this and like send its message in this sort of way, and how it uses its characters. It's really, really great emotional stuff, and I cried. So if you haven't seen Onward yet, I know it's available. It should be available now. But yeah, like it's worth going into blind. However, the main film that I wanted to talk about for this video is the best movie that I saw in a cinema in 2020, and that is The Invisible Man, directed by Leigh Whannell. I don't think it's like great exactly. I do have some issues with it. For one, I think that the movie does get a little less interesting as it goes on. Obviously, it's an original take on the H.G. Wells novel, which has been adapted into film before. But the ideas that it presents for like the first 2/3 of the movie aren't there as strongly, in my opinion, in the last third, and it's a little bit disappointing. The movie does take certain risks that I think mostly pay off, but they raise a lot of questions, and they raise certain ideas that I think deserve to be discussed a little bit more. And another issue that I have with the movie is that I think that the action that's in it tonally doesn't really fit with the rest of the movie. Leigh Whannell also did Upgrade, which he got a lot of acclaim for because the action there is very frenetic and very high octane. And here it's sort of the same style, but it really doesn't fit the sort of slow burn, paranoid tension that's in the rest of the film. But wow, Elizabeth Moss can act, man. She is one of the best actors working today, in my opinion, and I really believe that. She makes you care about Cecilia from the very first scene that you see her in. She's so good at showing sort of the lingering effects that that trauma can have on a person after they're essentially gaslighted by someone, or after they survive both domestic and sexual abuse. But what Elizabeth Moss does so well is that she looks to those same sources of trauma, and she also extracts lots of real rage and strength out of it. It's really, really compelling as a performance. But really the best part of this movie is Leigh Whannell's direction for those like slow burn paranoid parts. He gets so much atmosphere and so many thrills out of just pointing his camera at like negative space, and then he just sort of toys with the audio a little bit, and then you as an audience member, you start like looking throughout the frame to see if there's any sort of movement or sign of life. It's really great. Like, it reminds me of A Quiet Place and what John Krasinski did with that. And the story, as much as I do have like minor quibbles with it, I think it takes a lot of risks that do pay off. I think there are certain moments that are really dark and really disturbing, which I'm glad were in the movie. But the best way I can describe why I like this movie so much is, I don't know if this is gonna be like, if this is gonna make sense, but it sort of changed the way that I viewed the title. Because every time I used to read, The Invisible Man, the focus is always on invisible. Like, that's the unique thing, that's the scary thing, is that this person is unseen. However, with Leigh Whannell's movie and the way he chose to tell the story about survivors of abuse, he puts the emphasis on the man. So the scary part isn't the invisible, it's the fact that it's a man who's invisible. It's the fact that it's a man who can continue to harm women, but he evades accountability. I think that's scarier than anything else, and it's just fantastic storytelling. If they continue on with like these universal monster things, I really hope they're done with this much thought put into it, this much maturity. Yeah, like, I can't wait. Alright, so those were my thoughts on the new movies that came out in cinemas in 2020. The next couple of videos will be about TV shows exclusively. Please do check those out when those come out. So if you guys have any thoughts about anything I talked about in this video, please do leave me a comment down below. And as always, please do stay safe and stay healthy, and let's have a conversation.